Okay, so hello there, everyone, and welcome to today's District Administration Web Seminar. It's great to have you all with us. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kurt Isley-Durley. I'm the magazine's Web Seminar Editor, and I'll be your moderator. The title of our event, as you see here, is Personalized Learning in Elementary Mathematics, Strategies for Success, and is being brought to you through the generous support of our sponsor for today, McGraw-Hill Education, and we thank them very much for their support of our seminar here. First, before we start, just a bit of background about our topic for today and what we'll be taking a look at. New approaches to elementary mathematics curriculum, instruction, technology, and assessment are providing opportunities to personalize learning for each student, creating highly effective student-centered learning environments. In today's web seminar, we'll learn some ideas, strategies, and resources for delivering a positive, measurable impact on student outcomes in your district through personalized learning in K-6 math instruction. We're looking forward to a very interesting presentation here, so do stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. First, though, just some quick housekeeping. First off, as it says here, for tech support, you can use the chat panel that you should see at the right side of your screen there. Just send a message to our host and producer. His name is Joseph Morrow there, and let him know if you're having any trouble. He'll be able to help you out there. And also, speaking of that chat panel, you may have noticed we just posted the phone number and access code there at the right side of your screen. And as it says on the slide here, if you don't have computer speakers or if you're having any trouble at any time, or if you prefer to listen over the phone, some people prefer that, you can just dial in using those numbers to get the audio access over the phone. Also, as it says here, you can also use the Q&A. You should see at the bottom right-hand corner there to send a message to our speaker for today. Just enter your question there in the Q&A at any time. Feel free to ask a question at any point as we're going here. We'll get to as many as we can at the Q&A at the end. So again, if you have a question at any time, just type it in that Q&A, bottom right-hand corner there, and make sure it's set to all panelists like it shows on the slide here. And we'll get to those at the end. Also, speaking of questions, a common question we get is asking about accessing the slides and the archive recording at a later time, accessing the presentation. And also, as it says here, everyone will receive a follow-up email where you can access the slides. Also, Janet, our speaker, her new ebook, you'll see a link in that follow-up email to where you can find that ebook. So don't worry about that. You'll have ample opportunity to go back over the presentation or access that new ebook. As it said in our promotions, everyone will be getting a free access to that ebook. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, so with that, on to our program here. Today we're fortunate to have with us Janet Pittock. She's Director of Curriculum at McGraw-Hill Education. And so at this point, Janet had some computer problems, but she was able to call in. Are you there, Janet?
I certainly am. I'm so looking forward to talking to this group about my favorite thing, which is how to help kids do well in mathematics.
Okay, great. And so you have your slides there. I'll advance them for you.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so we're going to start first with looking at the grade 8 NAEP results. As you're very likely aware, only about a third of students exiting grade 8 and getting ready to go into Algebra 1 are scoring at proficient or above with NAEP. That means 2/3 of students have gaps that make it very likely they won't be successful in Algebra 1. And indeed, we find performance of students in Algebra 1 to be discouraging. So one of the questions I have, and we're going to move to the next thing, I have a poll set up. So what I'd like you to do is to use the poll function to choose all of the reasons, so this is multiple select, all of the reasons that you think contribute to 2/3 of U.S. grade 8 students being below proficient in mathematics. So is the issue weak foundations? Do you need better math materials? Do you think teachers need more support? Do you think that not everyone is a math person, so they're not all going to be proficient anyways? Do we need more time in mathematics classes? Or there's another reason that you think is a key reason that contributes to students being below proficient? And Kurt, when you feel like we've got some responses, maybe you can let us know and report on what happens there.
Absolutely, yeah. To our audience, you can see the poll at the right there. We just closed it. Thanks in advance for your participation. That has to process for a few seconds here, and then I'll let you know what the results are saying here, Janet.
Okay, well then we can move on to slide 4, and then maybe when we're done with that slide, we'll have some results.
Oh, we just got them here.
Oh.
Okay,
oh,
so
okay, what are they?
The top answer just barely is that C, teachers need more support, 86% choosing that. Followed closely by the first one, weak foundations at 82%. And then third is the second to last one, need more math time at 68%. And then need better math materials, the second one, at 55%. Not everyone is a math person, just 9%. So hardly anybody chose that. And then 18% said other. But so the top ones, teachers need more support and weak foundations.
Great. If anyone would like to share what their other was, you can stick that in the chat box, and other folks will be able to see that. I won't be able to see it at this point, but I'd be really interested in hearing what your ideas are there, and I'll be able to review that after the session. So moving on to the next thing, and that is universal mathematics intervention. So this is really the MTSS model, and what we have here is tier 1, which is all. So all students should be getting core instructional interventions. But this needs to be more than what we typically think of happening in a traditional math class. In a traditional math class, we think of students getting the core curriculum and moving kind of through in a pacing chart, and everybody getting the same thing at the same time. And the students are learning, or maybe not, but we keep moving through. So that's what people think of as in a traditional setting. But our vision now in multiple tiers system of supports is that all students get additional help so that 80 to 90% of them can be successful with the core curriculum. So it may be moving beyond the core curriculum, maybe there's a number of different things we can do here. But the idea is that what's delivered in the core classroom is enough to get 80 to 90% of students to being proficient, then leaving tier 2, which is more targeted to serve 5 to 10, and then only a very few, 1 to 5% of students going to tier 3, which is our typical self pull-out, special ed kind of situations, very intense procedures. So I want to focus today on that tier 1. What should be going on in the core instruction? And interestingly, the survey we just took that says teachers need more support, this is the problem. And I've been attending and talking to lots of district folks, and the quote has come up that teachers don't have the will or skill. So I think that all teachers, and I think we all believe that all teachers really want their students to be successful. So it's not that they don't want to do what it takes to be successful, but it's really, really hard to leave the core textbook, to leave kind of the script of what we do in mathematics and think about how else, what other things should we be doing for students to allow them to be successful with these materials, with these concepts. So we really do need that. And the number 2 reason that you all were looking at about why are saying that why students are below proficient is that they have weak foundations. Absolutely. And remember, when we look at students of different racial backgrounds or ethnicities and ELL students in those subsets of learners have actually an even lower level of proficiency in mathematics. And if your teachers are teaching to the average student who is deemed ready for grade level content, those students who aren't ready are just going to fall further and further and further behind. So this is impacting students of color and English learners more than other students. So what we need to do is look at how can we help teachers, educators, and learners be successful in this Tier 1 position. So I'm going to propose, we'll move to the next slide, slide 5. I'm going to propose that we use a learning systems approach and some personalization to meet those needs. So I think everyone will understand pretty quickly what a learning systems approach is, but let me kind of build it up. What we are used to in that traditional classroom is only that one building block, the core program. We hold that close and we follow that page to page, and it has been our Bible. The problem is we end up with the kinds of assessment results that we started the session with. So now if we think about a learning systems approach, we start with that green building block on the base, the goals and professional development. So goals is not only standards, which may not 100% match your core program, but it's not only standards, it's also what core competencies do you want? What kind of 21st century things do you want? What kinds of attitudes do you want students to have? Do you want them to have a growth mindset? There are a lot of goals that we have in a mathematics class that we can impact by what we do, and they're not all addressed by a core program. We also, therefore, need professional development for teachers, so that's, again, teachers need more support. We need ongoing professional development that will help teachers navigate the needs of students, help them understand how to manage time and manage resources so that we can meet more students' needs. So we could spend an entire session on goals and PD. But moving on, another thing that's become an increasingly important part of classrooms in the learning systems approach are assessments. So we're not only talking about the summative assessments that evaluate how a program has worked, how teachers have been effective, and how students have learned, but also assessments like placement assessments, diagnostic assessments, formative assessments that show immediately whether what we've been doing with students work. So managing those assessments, having a really robust set of assessments that aren't too time-consuming is a really important part of a learning systems approach, because only if you know what your students need can you address their needs appropriately. Another piece of the puzzle is therefore adaptive software, and there are many good pieces of adaptive software, and one of the things that they all have in common is they attempt to place a student in their zone of proximal development. So regardless of their grade level, their chronologic grade level, what we want to do is we want to place students where they need to learn. And then as they work, we gather information about, we help them move ahead quickly, we remediate. That's what happens in adaptive software. So it's really meeting the students where they are in a way that one teacher can't in a classroom of 30. So this is almost like a personal tutor for each student that's gathering data for the teacher and meeting the students where they need to be met. That data from the adaptive software can then impact, is another part of the assessment picture, and can feed what do I do with the core program, with which groups of students, what other focused resources do I need. So adaptive software can really be the backbone of a learning system in that it meets students' needs plus provides data that allows teachers to more successfully know what the students' needs are and then apply additional resources to meet those needs. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, which is another poll. So again, you'll be answering this poll, and the question is for you to think, what is your highest priority for improvement within your learning system approach? And this is, you can only select one for this poll. Is it the goals? Remember that multitude of goals that we had. Is it, do you need better PD to meet those, to support teachers more? PD can include coaching. Is it assessment? Do you not have enough information about where the students are? Is it that your do you need a better core program? Do you need adaptive software that can leverage and actually help teachers scale to meet each student's needs? Do you need focused resources? You have all these needs, but there's a specific need nothing's meeting and you need better focused resources. Do you need implementation systems? Do you have all the pieces, but you don't know how to put them together to meet students' needs and how to manage them? Or is there something else that you need? Okay, so Kurt, let me know when you think it's good to close that out and share the data.
Absolutely. So our results just posted here. So the top answer by a small margin here was focused resources, 28%, followed closely by PD at 22%, as well as assessment, 17%. Core program and adaptive software were each 11%, and then goals and implementation systems were each 6%. So top one was focused resources, followed by PD.
It's really interesting. Okay, so, with that in mind, I'm going to move to talk about the implementation model. And there are many, you'll find in, I'll be giving a brief overview of several implementation models. I'm going to start with this one, classroom rotations first, and spend really the bulk of my time on that. There's more in the ebook about everything I'm talking about. This is basically an overview of the ebook, which is not only the things that I'm talking about, but links to videos and other articles, some diversity of opinions. You'll find a lot more data there if you're feeling the need for that. So here's this implementation model, the classroom rotation. This is a model that most elementary school teachers are very familiar with. Many teachers use this, particularly in English language arts classrooms. It's very applicable to personalizing learning and meeting individual student needs in a math classroom. And it can also be used in a range of implementations, from fairly traditional to fairly innovative. And there's several pages in the ebook about the kinds of choices you make and can play with in classrooms to move along that continuum between traditional to innovative. But I'm going to talk about kind of two ends of that spectrum in relationship to this classroom model, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Let's look at the first part up here. At the top of the image is classroom instruction. So in a traditional classroom, this would be where the teacher is moving through the core program with the students as a whole. And so there's still room for that. Then they can go down and use other time for the stations, which may personalize learning a little bit more. In a more innovative classroom, the class instruction could be something like, I know maybe it's a class of 4th grade students and they're working on a variety of fractions concepts in your classroom. Your students are all over the place. But you know that all of the students understand the definition of a fraction, that it's 1/2 means one out of 2 equal parts. You could then, in the whole class instruction, have a math talk about 1/2 and why 1/2 is not always the same size. All 1/2s are different sizes. So 1/2 of an apple is different than 1/2 of a watermelon. It's about the proportion and the relationships to the whole than it is about those pieces being the same size. So that is a concept that you could talk about with the whole class because you know everyone's ready about it. It relates to maybe your unit on fractions that you're working on with students, but it's a way to do some whole group discussions, which is very important for students but not a traditional way to do it. So then let's talk about the rotation. So station 1, station 2, station 3. Station 1, in all cases, could be adaptive technology. So, which means every student is working on exactly the material they need with the kind of support they need provided by the software. So it would have could have instruction and practice, and each student would be working on something different. In a traditional classroom, this is what I call filling in the potholes of, kind of evening repair. So if you're working along and you're working in the same fraction thing, you may have students who don't understand what fractions are, certainly can't be adding fractions before they know what fractions are doing. So those students could be working on one thing, other students working on another. It could be totally asynchronous, but the point of the matter is students are getting the material they need to fill in the gaps that they're missing, that they need to be successful, which was, I believe, we said that was the second thing was those weak foundations. Adaptive software can be working on strengthening those foundations so that on-level work is more achievable for all students. If it was in a more innovative classroom, students could be working on this in the adaptive software, each in their own place, exactly the same way, but the teachers could be using the data that they get from where the students are working to impact all of the other areas. They can find out what students know about fractions to inform the whole class instruction. They can be choosing different kinds of practice materials, and they can be doing different things and grouping students differently in small group instruction based on what they learn from the adaptive technology. Let's jump to Station 3. Station 3 is practice materials. We all know how that's going to work in a traditional classroom. That's based on what we did in the whole class instruction. In an innovative classroom, it could be fill any of the needs that the teacher and the students have together decided that the students need to be practicing on. And it could even be small group independent work on project teams. That leaves Station 2. So in a traditional classroom, that's going to be some kind of small group instruction, potentially based on gaps that students have for the whole class stuff, or just anything the teacher thinks that they need to be. Similarly in an innovative classroom, but one of the things that can happen here as well is if you split your students half in Station 1 and half in Station 3, you can bring individual students into Station 2 for consultations. And this is one of the things that people grapple with when they start doing personalized learning, is that they feel that they don't have time to consult with students about how to become better independent learners. And this is a place in Station 2, you can make space for those kinds of ongoing conversations with students, meeting more frequently with students who are really grappling with learning independently, and meeting less frequently with students that are on track. So that's one implementation model. Moving to the next slide, I want to talk really quickly about an exemplar, which is a classroom in Riverside, California, at Monroe Elementary School. And here's an example. Here's Station 1, a student who's working on the adaptive software. She happens to be working on decimals. Move to the next slide. You see Dean Deaver, the teacher, working in Group 2, a Group 2 situation where he's got a couple of students and they're looking at some material. It could be again about decimals, or it could be about I see a number line on the table, so it could be it may be that they're placing decimals on the number line and they're using some material. But Dean is definitely here leading the lesson and talking to the students, and these students both need help on that concept. Moving on to the next slide, this could be Station 3, where a couple of students could be working together on a problem. And going to the final slide, I think that the really important thing is in personalized learning where students are moving around and teachers are not spending their entire time at the front of the room being the sage on the stage, there's more time for teachers to make connections with students. And this is something that teachers do uniquely well. There's nothing that can replace the relationship that a teacher has with a student. This kind of rotation model and allowing software to take some of the instructional duties over in multiple ways gives teachers time to do something that they're uniquely suited for. One of the things, I love a quote that I got from Dean when he was talking to us about his experience in this classes, and he says, I'm really teaching students to be lifelong learners and problem solvers. Okay, we'll call it math. And I think as a math person, when I hear Dean say that, you know, I love math. This is what I've spent my career working on, how to present and how to create experiences for students so that they learn math well. But indeed, I agree with him. Math is a vehicle for all of those goals that we have for students, not just mathematical prowess. So it's just really nice to see that classroom rotation in Dean's case has allowed him to focus on the things, on the goals that he really wants to focus on. All right, so really quickly, I'm going to spend just a minute on each of these next slides, just to note that there are additional implementation models that you can use as you're beginning to move away from the core program being the only way that you address mathematics. Another one is a homework model where you could use a variety of materials so that each student may not have the same homework, so that you're personalizing or differentiating via homework. You can still have a traditional classroom, but the homework could be different for each student, meeting their unique needs. It could be the adaptive software, or it could be any kind of assignment that makes sense for the individual student. The next model is a computer lab or CART. So again, the nice thing with going to a computer lab or a CART is that you can have one-on-one, one device for each student, which makes it much easier for the teacher to manage than a rotation model where students really have to understand how to work more independently. This way, all the students could be working on one thing. It could be adaptive software where teachers can gain some of that data and it can begin to impact what they do in their regular classroom, or it could be just practice in a number of ways. But it's a way to begin to experience something beyond the core, and often a very easy step for teachers to take as a first step. The final implementation model I'll talk about, and there's a couple others in the ebook, but the last one I'm going to talk about is the menu model. Again, this can be, you could have one set of goals for the students and just different activities they can choose from to personalize for them, so that if a student would prefer to interact with a video, they could do that, or they could do, there's a variety of choices you could make. Another thing that teachers often do as they get a little bit deeper into personalizing is they may have different menus for different groups of students who are in different places along their learning continuum. So not everybody has to be working in the fractions unit, for example, or they don't all have to be working on adding fractions. They could be working on whatever they need to. So these are a variety of models that you can use to implement the learning system we were talking about. Okay, so moving on to the last thing is I've been talking about this idea of traditional classrooms and innovative classrooms, and classrooms that where traditional classrooms often have a difficult time in meeting the needs of each individual student and personalizing, and innovative classrooms may address that in a variety of ways. The difficulty is, you know, we have some really great teachers who have reached their pinnacle of practice in traditional instruction, and they have many students who are successful. Potentially there are students with gaps in their understanding that need something different. On the other hand, you know, we can imagine and define, you know, this amazing, innovative, personalized learning classroom that requires a lot of support for teachers. Teachers aren't there yet. Some teachers expect themselves to jump from the pinnacle of one to the pinnacle of another, and while some teachers may be able to make that leap, others often in making that leap land in some uncomfortable position in between those two pinnacles, or never attempt to make the leap at all, because it's very scary, it's very difficult. What I suggest is we build a bridge from the pinnacle of traditional learning to the pinnacle of innovation, and we travel across that together, not expecting everyone to arrive or be in the same place or arrive at the same place. Just like our students, not all of our teachers are in the same place, so we need to personalize this journey. Moving on to the next slide, and one way we can do this is by looking at a continuum of practices that meet learners' needs. So we can put some that along the left that give us limited opportunities to personalize, and some along the right that optimize. And we can play with each of these. We can decide, well, I'm going to leave everything over on the traditional side and move the one-size-fits-all and have a variety of learning interactions. So not all my students are going to have the same learning interaction. I'm going to give them a variety. I'm going to just play with that one. Everything else is going to stay in my comfort zone, and I'm going to play with that one. So the idea here is that you can think about how teacher-directed versus student-directed things are, one-size-fits-all to a variety of learning interactions. Think about the SAMR model and whether the text is enhancing what you do in the classroom, so it's just replacing what you already do, or it's really transforming what your classroom is like, so that you're not doing it the same way that you've always done it. Data to evaluate versus data that actually impacts instruction. This one's difficult, pacing chart driven versus competency driven. Once you move to competency driven, it kind of breaks down a bunch of stuff that's systematic. So that's something to talk about, and it's not a classroom-based decision. And then, you know, where do we want to be between independence and collaboration? We certainly want students to be individually accountable, but that collaboration is really important. So these are things, and again, there's more about this in the ebook. These are things that that you can explore, and it's a way to start moving across that bridge as you play with these different things. It starts you to have experiences that are positive, that are challenges. It allows teachers to experience the same kind of growth mindset and understanding that making mistakes is how we learn. So moving on to the next slide. So the next steps is I'd like you to think about what things you heard here that might be applicable to your situation, and what might you do after this presentation to take action right away to do more in your school. So what kind of investigation, what are you going to try, what are you going to read, what could you do? And if you would, I know that there are a lot of people here on the webinar, and I know that there's a lot of powerful brains out there. So if you could enter your action in the chat box, first of all, it actually makes you personally accountable and more likely to do it. And second of all, you may put an action down there that will help somebody else as they review what's in the chat box. I'm going to take like 15 seconds or so to allow you to have time to do that. So we can move to the next slide. On the next slide, I put my email address. It's Janet Pittock at mheducation.com. I am happy to be somebody who you ping as you're on your journey. I love to be in contact with educators and hear what's really happening in your schools and your districts. So please feel free to contact me if you need to. You can also tweet at PLMathK8, and if others will be doing that about the things that they're observing, and there'll be some conversations going on there. A lot of educators tell me that Twitter is one of their preferred PD locations, so that's a good place to connect with others and share your journey. And then I think we're at the point of taking some questions if there are any.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Janet. Very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing your time and expertise here. You covered a lot of ground there. It's very interesting. Yes, to our audience, now is your opportunity here. If you would like to ask a question of Janet about what we're talking about here, personalizing learning in elementary mathematics, just enter it in the Q&A at the bottom right-hand corner there. Not the chat window, but in the Q&A, as Janet was saying there, if you have some next steps, some action items that you'd like to share after this presentation, how this will impact you and your school system, feel free to enter that in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll discuss here. But this is the time for your questions. Again, feel free to enter in the Q&A. And again, another couple reminders, you'll have the opportunity to access the slides and the archive recording here if you want to go back over it. And of course, you will also see a link to Janet's ebook that she referenced there a couple times in that follow-up email. So you'll have an opportunity to do that. Let's see, first question just asked about how can I learn more about some of these topics. Janet, I would imagine that's a good opportunity to talk about the ebook and some of the things that are in there.
Yeah, so definitely the ebook, and there'll be a lot of links there. Another thing is the Christensen Institute, which I believe is referenced in there, is a really good place to go for additional material. I would just start with that. There's some other books. There's Blended and books about blended learning as well. Most of the resources that you'll find out there about blended learning are not about mathematics, and there are some particular things about mathematics that make personalizing difficult, and we can just link back to this teacher support thing. It's not only teacher support in the classroom practices, but it's also teacher support in having the depth of knowledge in grade level mathematics, so you can do it more than one way, but also where the roots of that mathematics come from, so that teachers can do the precursors. Again, in that ebook, there's a page about that specifically, with some links to things that Linda Gojek, who's a previous NCTM, president of NCTM, has written as some NCTM resources, also the progressions document. So you'll find a rich variety of resources when you download that ebook.
Great. Great, and I encourage all of our attendees, everyone in our audience, to download that and take a look. That's a great resource that Janet's made available to us. Next question here. Towards the end there, you talked about moving. You had that slide here. In fact, I can put it back up from the limited opportunities to the optimized opportunities. So someone asked, if we don't use pacing charts and whole class instruction, how will all students become proficient on the content we assess with high-stakes tests? So it seems to be asking about, as you move more towards the competency-driven, is there a tension there with some of those assessments and preparing for those tests?
Yeah, and this is the biggest question I hear from administrators, of course, because they're evaluated and responsible for growth in their districts. So the first thing I'd like to start with is most of our mathematics instruction right now is pacing chart driven, not competency driven. And if we harken back to the first slide I showed, that's working for only about 1/3 of students, and it's working for way less than that in our most challenged students. So what we're doing right now doesn't work. Therefore, the concept here is that if we make sure that our students are competent and do have a firm foundation of understanding, that as they move forward grade to grade, they will become competent, and this will improve. But this is the tension. This is the tension, because we have to be patient enough to see that that's working with students.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's interesting to think about there. Next question asks, so what about students who are disengaged with mathematics? Won't they fail miserably if they have to take control of their own learning? What do you think about that disengagement with mathematics? How would that affect this approach?
So one of the things, and I didn't put it in this presentation, but one of the things I do here is I often talk about the zone of proximal development. And if you think about the zone of proximal development, if you think of it as a graph where one is students' proficiency, the other is the difficulty of material, the zone of proximal development is where the difficulty and the student's knowledge is balanced. And if you have material that's too easy for students, they're going to become disengaged, they're going to become bored, and these are your gifted students who become troublemakers. There's a lot of trouble there. On the other hand, if you have material that's too difficult for students, they end up disengaging because they feel like there's no way they can be successful because they don't have the tools and the foundation they need to be successful. So right now, the way that we do things where everyone is doing the same thing and students really need different material, that is causing disengagement in and of itself. When we look at giving students more control, now this doesn't mean that we say it's a free-for-all. This is where the teacher is guiding the student during that station rotation, that number 2 piece. The teacher is key here in making sure that students are making good decisions, that we're finding methods and challenges that engage students. One of the biggest pieces of engagement is when students are doing things and they find immediate success. So having success or grappling with something and getting success on an appropriate level of challenge is one of the most engaging things. We also know immediate feedback. Am I doing it right or not? If not, what should I do next? That's another thing that very much engages students. But it is the teacher's job to work with students who show that they're becoming disengaged and find ways to engage them. And there's a variety, of course, there's a variety of ways to do that. You have a bigger palette of tools in a personalized learning situation than you do in a traditional situation to engage students who are becoming disengaged.
Sure, absolutely, and that's a great lead in here. Speaking of teachers, someone shared an action step for themselves and what they're going to do next. They say utilize the continuum to determine where teachers are in meeting the needs of their students. So basically assessing their teachers, where they are in this.
And self-assessment and goal and even some goals. So maybe a teacher plots herself on these and says, okay, well, I'm really interested in seeing what happens if I change from one size fits all and I have 2 things that the students could do. How does that impact? So not only evaluating, but then having teachers make their own. Again, this is again, I'm going to default to having a student-centered, in this case, student-centered being your teacher leaders, having them be involved in making decisions about it.
Great, and let's see, some more questions and action steps, next steps. Thanks to our audience for submitting these. Someone else says, next steps, create a continuum of practice to share with my teachers.
Yeah, that sounds like, yeah, great.
Great. Let's see, I'll try to just got a bunch at the same time here. Let's see, this person says, we've worked on defining personalized learning in our district. They'd love to get your thoughts on our definition. So then he says, here's our definition. Personalized learning maximizes the learning and motivation of students through the utilization of student choice, collaborative design, connections of learning to student pursuits, and student autonomy. Looks like he's going to continue writing here, but what do you think so far, Janet, if that makes sense to you?
It does, and I have to share that hearing it and not seeing it is going to make it a little more difficult for me because I tend to
Sure.
to interact with things visually more. But that sounds like it's on the right track. Was there something in there about goal setting, student involvement in goal setting?
Says student choice, connections of learning to student pursuits and student autonomy. I don't think that section referenced goal setting.
Yeah, so I would say it's really important for students to know what the goal is and why that's the goal and how, and then to be able to measure something towards the goal. So I would always put goal setting in a personalized learning definition. Traditionally, another good place to go is to look again at that Christensen Institute has got some really nice definitions of things like personalized learning. Generally, there's also something about pace, that it being for the student at their own pace, which again comes back to this competency-driven piece. But pace is super important. If the student can't slow down when they feel they need to slow down, or go faster when they feel like they've already got it, that tends for them to become disengaged. So pacing is another important piece. And pacing is also super important for EL students, for example, who may need to review things a few times so that they get over the hump of connecting their understanding in their own language to English, and that they can build the English language capabilities they need in order to move on to the mathematics. So pace is super important for a variety of reasons.
Okay, sure. And then he goes on to finish the statement referencing the goals that you mentioned. This is directly implemented using clearly created goals and outcomes, student self-reflection, and valuable teacher feedback utilizing flexible learning environments and pacing. So there you go, the goals and the pacing he ended up adding.
That's perfect. And again, if that attendee would like more of a conversation, I'm totally willing to look at what they do as they do it and give them a couple of comments as they move forward. But that's sounding like it's very much on point. Great.
Several more next steps here that folks have contributed, referencing let's see, this person's a math interventionist. They hope to be able to coach their teachers on trying a new approach, new approach that's more individualized to student needs. Someone else says they hope to begin next year by moving to competency-driven instruction, and he talked about that and how that can be challenging, right, Janet?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it's just really laying the foundation with the parents as well as the teachers and administration is super important, and the expectation of how are we going to measure growth, how are we going to see, because your normal high-stakes assessments is not going to do it. Use something like NWA's MAP test or something that measures really where the students started and how much growth they have that's not related to their grade level. Will be very important. And also some of the things that I led this conversation with around, you know, why are we trying something new and we're not 100% sure how it's going to work? Because right now it's only working for X% of our students, and these students are falling further and further behind. So, you know, let's see, and these are the ways we're going to measure to make sure that we're not off the track. So that I think that if everyone is informed about why and how we're going to measure to make sure that we're not doing the wrong thing, that will really help a lot in making that move.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's got to be kind of a sea change from the way most education is done right now.
That's right.
Another person says they want to work on their implementation model without elaborating there, but you talked about several different implementation models, right?
That's right. And I think this would be a place where I would refer to the ebook, which describes them in a little bit more detail and gives more a wider variety. Also, again, I can't say probably enough about the Christensen Institute. They've got, they list out all of them and give you videos and other ways to see those. So if you're wanting to explore, those are two good resources.
Absolutely, great. And again, to our audience, we've made that ebook from Janet available on the DA site. We just chatted out that link to you in the chat window at the right. You'll also see a link to it in your follow-up email that you receive later on today. So keep an eye out for that. Well, I think we've hit all of our questions and all of our comments and feedback from our audience here. Thank you so much to everyone in our audience for contributing to the conversation. We really appreciate your feedback and being part of this conversation here with Janet. So on behalf of District Administration, I'd like to wrap things up here and thank our speaker once again, Janet. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your time and expertise with us. And thank you again to our sponsor for today, McGraw-Hill Education, for their generous support. And to everyone in our audience, of course, thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you found this presentation informative and useful to you. Producing seminars like this one is just part of our mission here at DA to inform school district leaders like you about the latest news and trends in K-12 management. You'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we discussed here in the pages of our monthly print magazine and digital edition, and on our website, as well as through our email newsletters, which include DA Daily and District CIO. And as I mentioned before, if you would like to share this event with your colleagues, if you want to go back over the presentation at your own pace, you'll find the recording at the URL on your screen here as an archive recording within about 48 hours. And if you'd like to download the slides and access that ebook, just keep an eye out for that email that you'll receive later on today. So that is it for today's event. Once again, I'm Kurt Isley-Durley for District Administration. On behalf of everyone on our production team here at DA, goodbye everyone and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us.